Hello, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon session. I am so excited to really talk about an interesting and timely topic. My name is Terry Takai, and I'm a Senior Vice President at the Center for Digital Government. And we are so excited to introduce a series where we're going to be talking about the latest and greatest issues facing technology professionals today. Now, all of us have been hearing about ChatGPT, and we're all wondering, what is the impact going to be on state and local government? Well, today we have Dustin Heisler, who's our Chief Strategy and Innovation Officer. And he's going to be telling you all you need to know about ChatGPT Unleashed. What is the game-changing future of generative AI for state and local governments? So Dustin, welcome and take it away.
All right, thanks, Terry. As you said, ChatGPT is definitely top of mind for many people out there. Your kids might be using it. You may or may not know about that, but today we're going to break down all of that and more and really help you understand what the technology is and how it works. So just before we dive into the content, a few housekeeping notes are on the screen. We're going to record this and make sure everyone gets a copy afterwards. The slides that I'm going to plow through, we'll also make sure you get a copy of. And if we've got time for Q&A at the end, I'll try to tackle those, but go ahead and submit them, because even if we don't have time to get through all of them, we'll make sure to follow up. And it's helpful for us to know what your questions are as we plan our next series of webinars on this topic. So as we look at generative AI, I wanted to kind of set the stage with something that we just rolled out at our Beyond the Beltway event in DC just a few weeks ago, and that was the Center for Digital Government's 2023 Tech Radar. And basically, as you look at emerging technologies, there's a variety of different frameworks that are out there, right? You can look at the hype cycle, you can look at different top 10 lists that are curated. And what we wanted to do is take all of our data and all of our benchmark surveys and really overlay that into what is immediately impacting the technology infrastructure of agencies, but then what are the outer bands of that and what do agencies need to prepare for? So not a surprise as we look at the immediate, it's all the things we've talked about previously: technical debt, data management, low code, no code, workforce, shadow apps. But when you look at kind of this next band out, this next wave of procurements that are emerging, this is where we start to see, some of these things that were a little bit further out, but now we've got generative AI, we have AI and ML, we've got workforce augmentation, and all of these are kind of wrapped together. And so this is why we wanted to do this webinar today, not just because, every article you read out there has some layer of ChatGPT in it, but also because this is going to start to work its way into what you're procuring. And for those of you on the industry side, as you look at, how you sell to government, this is going to start to impact that as well. And so we wanted to just have a webinar on what does this mean for our market? What does this mean for state and local government? And so, of course, this is trending, no shortage of articles. You can go to govtech.com and see a great curation of just different things. In fact, in a January issue, I interviewed ChatGPT and asked it about the regulatory environment and what it needed to know. So we had a great write-up on that. So this is definitely a top of mind thing for many of you, and you're hearing about it, but what is it? So let's first take a couple steps back and look at how the way that we access the internet has changed. So you think about Web 1 was really focused on consumption. Web 2 was focused on kind of consumption with the ability to really start to provide information back and to start to, kind of read, write. Where we're at now is kind of this generative web landscape, which is really interesting, where you have all of these historical bases of knowledge that you can pull, but you can have it curated specific to you and your role. And so you can have on the fly real-time content and experiences. So think about your Amazon-esque experiences when you go and shop, for something. Everything is built around you and your data, but what if you could have that everywhere that you went? And what if you had the ability to interact with information in a way that was comfortable, that you could talk to it, that you could text with it? This is where we start to get into this generative web landscape, and the technology's been developed. In fact, many of the models that you can use that are in market were, 2 to 3 years old. And so it's just exploded onto the scene and created an arms race for AI solutions, both at the industry level, but also from a national standpoint with other countries. So what is generative AI? We keep talking about this macro category. Well, it's basically just a category of artificial intelligence generally that is designed to recognize patterns and make predictions. And this creates basically new content types. It's generative AI. It's generating text. images, audio, and more. And it's really a combination of a couple different competencies, but both looking at natural language processing and deep learning through neural networks. And we'll talk a little bit about how that applies here. So I promise these are the most technical slides that I'm going to show, but I want to make sure that you've got some foundational knowledge on really what this is and how it works. So let's start with text, kind of the basis of generative AI and really the basis of ChatGPT. So this exploded onto the scene a few months ago. This is a screenshot of what it looks like for those of you that have not logged on to it. And this gives you basically a text prompt, an open prompt that you can converse with, just like you're talking to a friend. It gives you examples, capabilities, limitations, those types of things. But one thing to note is that the knowledge base that's underlying to this is not still connected to the internet. It was severed back in 2021. So you're looking at a historical view of the web, but it's been trained on some pretty interesting things. We'll talk about what that means. Now, ChatGPT is what we call a generative pre-trained transformer. That's where that GPT comes from, that has been trained on OpenAI's large language model, LLM. So two acronyms, but let me break it down for you. So basically, LLMs are machine learning models that are really designed to understand natural language and have kind of a taxonomy associated with it so that you can process that information much quicker. So think of it like a large knowledge base. Then we start to get into generative pre-trained transformers. Think about this as kind of like a trained model on top of that knowledge base. And so ChatGPT is basically a specialized trained language model on top of a larger database of knowledge. And so again, I promise those are the most technical aspects of how we're going to look at that. So what this allows you to do is provide, unstructured text input into a language model that can then provide an output associated with that. And so this is what allows it to feel like you're conversing with a friend. And this is what makes it in more human as you kind of converse with it. Now, ChatGPT is not the only example of this type of generative AI setup. You've got a variety of other companies that are either leveraging some of the underlying infrastructure of it, like GPT-3, or building their own. Microsoft has their own chat kind of embedded in there. They've got a deep partnership with OpenAI, and Google has their own Baird approach to this based on their language model. You have Meta and many other companies that are also really trying to push out with their own trained models that you can use as a way to converse and interact with a bunch of information that's unstructured. Now, this landscape around text is exploding as well. So again, not just one company, not just one application, but this is something that has really become prevalent from marketing solutions to writing to AI assistants to sales tools to support others. I mean, you have highly specialized applications that are leveraging generative AI in order to help you become more effective and to augment the way that you work. Now let's talk about the media side of things. And this is, where it gets a little interesting, because what I mean by media, this is rich media, and AI can be used to now create images, to create voices, to create, any type of synthetic version of something. And one of the best examples is called DALL-E, which is, they have a second version of it out now. And this allows you to basically prompt for generative AI to create an image for you. So an example, my prompt here: a futuristic city with connected autonomous transportation systems, vertical green spaces, and walkways. Based on that prompt text, this is what DALL-E came back with as 4 potential options that were AI created. These are unique to that prompt. I could regenerate it if I didn't like these options, or I could further clarify the prompt in order to get additional options. But this is the new world of generative AI, where now I can create. I don't have to go to a stock image place. I don't have to go find a photo, but I can now start to create. Now, you can imagine there's a lot of really good and also some questionable implications of this for the public sector that we have to confront. Now, this is an AI program that generates its own images from textual input using, again, a generative adversarial network architecture. And so last technology definition here for you, but basically this is a machine learning model that generates synthetic data by using neural networks and training 2 neural networks together to create a feedback loop. So really, it's fascinating because it's taking noise, it's taking that through a generator and actually trying to discriminate things that are not real and validate things that are real in order to train the system. So traditionally in AI systems, you would have to use supervised learning or unsupervised learning. It would require a high degree of human input if it was a supervised learning model. And so this is something that now we've created a clever technology way of actually mitigating some of that. So let us continue going forward. And this, as we look at the landscape of generative AI as it relates to media, we've got images, we've got code, we've got speech, we have video, all kinds of different components here. And again, a huge blast of energy and market momentum as it relates to all of these new types of technologies that can create rich media now, not just text. And so a whole marketplace emerging here as we go forward. Now, what's driving this generative AI landscape? Well, I think that's where it's important to look at kind of the front end and the back end. So traditionally, when you look at exponential technologies, there's either a back-end component that has been an underlying driver of that, or maybe a niche front-end application like ChatGPT. Well, we have a perfect storm of innovation here, because if you look at all of the different types of media, text, code, images, speech, video, 3D, even other things beyond that, you have back-end architectures that are being opened up through APIs so that anyone can build applications that leverage them. So like the underlying models of some of the ChatGPT dynamics are built on GPT-3, and you have an open API that you can integrate into that and use it for your own applications, which we'll talk about. But then you have an explosion of those applications that are hitting the scene and allowing you to have very specialized technology to deal with mass notification, image generation, social media, whatever it might be. And so these things are hitting at once, creating an entire ecosystem and marketplace of new generative AI capabilities. That's also created a rush with a lot of existing incumbents in market to identify ways to create generative AI capabilities either on their platform or embedded within their application stack. And so we'll talk about that. So as we look at this for government, and as we look at this for state and local government, basically, there's kind of three ways that I like to slice this. You have the ability to leverage generative AI for people augmentation, for knowledge augmentation, and for experience augmentation. And so let's break this down. So as you think about people augmentation, there will come a point where everyone has, in essence, their own secretary, their own administrative assistant in their pocket. And so these types of generative AI systems will enable people to converse with these types of bots that may interface with third parties or other types of technology going forward, but it's going to make everyone have the ability to make database decisions, to think about it for the public sector, to draft policy based on prompts and inputs that I give it with what I'm trying to solve, to enhance our customer service. So rather than just hitting a chat bot and trying to find the right word combination to get a live agent, what if that bot actually abstracted the fact that it's not just a FAQ regurgitated, but it was actually helpful in the same way as a human. It also raises a lot of disclosure dynamics, which we'll talk about, fraud detection, risk mitigation, even coding examples. If you're a developer, if you've got an IT team that's trying to navigate a specific problem, this is a great way to kind of brainstorm and think about it. So it's like having a version of an assistant that is a mirror of yourself that you can use to continue to find interesting ways to navigate your challenges. Now, from a knowledge standpoint, government has more data than we know what to do with. In the public sector, we got ordinances, legislative actions, all kinds of things. What if that knowledge actually wasn't trapped in a PDF or a codification system? What if that knowledge was accessible through generative AI? What if you could do data analysis to understand the impact of certain laws and legislations? What if you were able to map these institutional knowledge to specific roles to automate onboarding processes for the public sector? What if you could actually, do digital twin technology without having all of the data be your own, but you're able to leverage generative AI to help you simulate that? What if you could automate knowledge capture altogether? So this knowledge augmentation base will basically allow us to tap into what has traditionally been trapped into our minds, right? You have a legacy employee that leaves, that institutional knowledge goes with them. What if we could learn from all of their footprints with our agencies? What if we could learn from all of the help desk tickets that we have with AI? What if we were able to do that in a way where we didn't have to have a human go and train it, but we were able to suck it into a neural network and leverage these types of unstructured and structured and semi-supervised learning? And then we get into experience augmentation, which is really where we see the future of government experiences. We've said at the Center for Digital Government that agencies will not own every front door into their services, meaning that the future of service delivery will allow constituents to access government services through third parties. Maybe they're trying to renew their driver's license and they use a third party to go wait in line for them at the DMV. Well, that already exists today, but maybe in the future, you're leveraging a chatbot or a virtual assistant to help go and represent yourself at a meeting, or capture notes and summarize it for you, or personalize information in a way that is consumable to you. This will provide greater accessibility to government services, but we'll need to ensure that we don't leave anyone behind, and also increase the rise of third parties that can provide these experiences for constituents. And so we see experience augmentation as a fundamental aspect of this. And so, this is also not hypothetical anymore, because now we have companies that are in our market that are actually embedding aspects of generative AI into their solutions today. So this is a great example from ClearGov, that basically, if you look at like your budget book and your budget process and all the work that you have to do to prepare, all of, that as you go through that, wonderfully complex process, a lot of it requires narratives and summarizing data and looking at tables and extracting context from it. And so what they've done is they've integrated in and have this aspect called First Draft, where you click a button and it summarizes the underlying data that is below that into a narrative text box. So again, this is using the generative AI text, so that GPT model, as a way to generate that. And you can go in and edit it, customize it, but you're starting with something and not nothing. And I think as we look at generative AI, the goal here isn't to replace humans, but to augment them and give them a starting point that allows them to be more effective at what they do. This is a great example from a financial standpoint. As we look at press releases, agencies are trying to always look at how to announce and kind of frame those things in. City has an interesting tool that they embedded within their technology stack that allows you to leverage prompts to create press releases on the fly. Now, you're not going to probably use that immediate thing, but you might edit it and turn it into something that you can, push out in the market as well. And so, again, another example of, taking what you have and finding ways to augment it and to give your employees a starting point where they can go from there forward. So now, what do we need to consider along the way? There's a lot, under the hood of this, and I'm, watching some of the questions that are coming in around, compliance, accessibility, plagiarism, all kinds of things that are out there that we do need to confront. And so there's a lot more than these four, but today we're going to start with four and look at, things that you need to consider if you're going to look at leveraging generative AI within your organization, maybe even just personally. So the first one is around prompting. And basically, the generative AI landscape, the prompt is really the secret sauce in the output. So whether you're trying to generate text or whether you're trying to create an image that is a complete characterization of what you want, you have to prompt it appropriately in order to get that. So this has also created the rise of new titles in our industry, including the prompt engineer. And you're going to start to see shifts in some of the kind of administrative landscape job descriptions that start to look for prompting as an aspect of what people need from a skill set. Now, let me talk a little bit about how this is actually applicable. So these are examples that I ran through ChatGPT. So if I prompt, in this case, explain the government budget process, I get a pretty robust, explanation that's generalized to government, but I didn't say what level of government or what specific government agency. I get the general budgetary process: preparation, presentation, review, approval, implementation, evaluation. But as I start to go deeper and I reprompt, I say, okay, now explain the state of Texas budget process. This starts to take those same levels, but also add context to it. So preparation, we've got the Governor's Office of Budget Policy and Policy that is in this. We've got the legislative review process. We have an approval process. We've got the governor's approval, implementation, monitoring, evaluation, the collaborative effort between all the different departments that have to do this. So this starts to allow me to get more knowledge from adding more context to that prompt. Now, if I say explain the state of Texas budget process in a short form paragraph for someone not familiar with traditional government processes or terms, this is where I get this, right? The whole budget process in a single paragraph. So I can start to actually personalize things. Now, think about that in the context of how we communicate in government. Everything today is a template. If you get an email from a government agency, it's a template. But what if the template was actually personalized to you, was actually created for you or summarized for you? Maybe the agency's not using it, but your bot takes the input and actually summarizes it and says, hey, here's what you need to know about that 45-page document that you received. Here's the executive summary. Here are the key points that we identified. This is the power of generative AI to do that. Now, if I take that another step further and say, what are the key dates that a citizen should know if they would like to have input on the budget process? Again, taking that same institutional knowledge and now taking it and making it accessible. Now I get timeframes of when things typically happen based on historical activities. These hearings take place in February or March. Here is when this normally occurs. Now I'm starting to get more knowledge that I can use based on the prompt that I have. Now, for those of you on the industry side, summarize the key dates for industry partners. I shifted the role. And if you want to have an input on technology priorities within the state, now we start to see, here's how you influence that. Here's where those dates and how those dates may impact you, not as just a regular citizen, but as an industry partner looking to do business with state or local government. So now you understand, as you look at prompting, the key is to provide context for these large language models to interpret that data in order to provide an output that works for you and that meets the needs that you have. So some best practices that we identified: you got to be clear and specific, use natural language, and provide context. Now, the beauty of generative AI is you don't have to start from scratch every time. Every input you have is an input that it learns. And so if I'm talking about the budget process and I say, okay, now clarify that for a citizen that lives in that area, I don't have to go restate my original request. This isn't Siri like on our phones. This is something that actually will allow us to build on and add context as we go forward. So again, the power of prompting is going to be the power of output that you get. And this is going to be a game-changing thing for those that lean into it. But it also is a new skill set that we have to learn to become proficient at. Now we've got transparency and policies for use. And this is really important too, because as you start looking at this generative AI landscape and you start using it, we have to get ahead of the disclosures for it. There's not legal mandates on, if you leverage AI to create a social media post, you need to cite that. We don't have that today. We do have it as it relates to algorithmic decision-making. If you're going to leverage it to set bail or do something like that, you have to do it. But we need to start to think about how we enact disclosures for our use of AI that cover us. And so this is an example that I created here just to talk about, hey, if you're going to use it for promotional and marketing, you don't have to cite it every time. But if you're going to use it for any type of non-marketing use case, let's say you're going to have it write policy, well, you probably want to at least disclose the fact that it was augmented or maybe inspired by elements of artificial intelligence. And so maybe you took that and you took it to the next level. But we have to ensure that we keep human in the loop, and we have to ensure that we get ahead of this. Now, this is something for those of you in the government, go to your legal counsel, talk to them a little bit about it. It is a gray area today, but just like privacy policies and other things, I think we have to get ahead of the landscape, the regulatory landscape. And if you're going to experiment with it, disclose the fact that you're experimenting with it and what use cases you have. Now, there's also the negatives of this. There's the potential uses against government. I mean, we've got all kinds of media that's been out there on disinformation and misinformation. I mean, imagine your adversaries having access to the same level of technology to create all kinds of, misinformation. And now we've got, deep fakes in the generative AI rich media, where we can get into, voices and video and all kinds of things that we can spoof or, create a perception of something that is not true or is not there. And so this has also created an arms race on technologies to validate whether or not something is AI generated, because not everything is going to put that on the actual generation. You're not going to have a watermark on it, but something to be aware of, because what you see may not be what you actually see. As we look at cybersecurity, one of the biggest threat vectors is as it relates to social engineering, sending emails out, getting people to click links, traditional phishing, emulation of people. Well, now you've got a tool that can learn the mannerisms of individuals. So if I take previous emails from a mayor and I say, hey, write an email that is mimicking or that is, basically using the mannerisms of these previous prompts to do this, what's to stop that from being used to get someone to click a link or for malicious purposes? And so this aren't, you can't look for bad grammar here or try to find things. I mean, we're at a point in time where generative AI is going to make it very difficult to distinguish what is real and what's not. And so this is a new IT challenge as we kind of look at, now even mannerisms themselves and even some of the behavioral attributes are not enough. We have to go a little bit deeper than that. And then, of course, we have the evolving landscape of ethics as it relates to this, from bias to privacy to transparency, accountability, human oversight, and human in the loop, and overall safety of these systems being embedded in critical infrastructure. There's a lot of ethical considerations that we need to start to have conversations about. And I think part of that starts with experimentation. It starts with disclosing, what you're experimenting with. And then, having that conversation. This is something we're going to continue to research at the center. It's something we're going to continue to look for examples of best practices that are out there and kind of bring that back to you with who's doing what and how they're leveraging it. I also, just for fun, asked ChatGPT itself, how should state and local government agencies use generative AI? And so we'll make this available to you in the deck, but you can see, based on the context that I provided and the prompt that I provided, it's got a lot of different ways that you can leverage technology like that, from writing code to sentiment analysis to traffic management to, risk assessment, to evaluating proposals that you're getting and understanding potential risk associated with that, even civic engagement and policymaking. So lots of different things to unpack here as a part of this generative AI landscape. I did mention that I would share some links. So there's some links in the deck as well to some of the technologies. But again, this is a wild, wild west of lots of exploding capabilities, both at an infrastructure level and an application level. And we're going to see a lot of, interesting things emerge over the next few months as it relates to that going forward. So let's open it up for some questions now. And I know we've got a ton of questions that are coming in. Ooh, this hopper is full. So let's see. Yes, slides will be shared. There's no attribution in GPT. Could the output be considered plagiarism? That's an interesting question. If you're directly using the output, so if you're, having it write an essay or an article for you and you're putting it online, it kind of gets into the gray area of, well, you didn't write it, but also you didn't cite who did write it. So I think that's where disclosure is going to be important. I know a lot of education institutions, and we have, a version of this we're going to do on the education side on the 14th of April. A lot of those institutions are employing tools that they can use to distinguish whether or not something has been written as it relates to what students are submitting. So significance of ChatGPT 3 versus ChatGPT 4, that's a great question. So, right now we're leveraging an earlier version of the model. They are on a more advanced version of the model, and there is a significant difference. I mean, it's an evolutionary leap in the technology itself. So we can definitely get in, probably on our next one, we'll dig into more detail on the nuances of kind of the underlying technology. But just remember, what we're looking at today is kind of an early example of what's possible with the technology from 2021. Think about the amounts of development and exponential progress that we've had since then. Will governments have to create machine-readable knowledge bases with all of our rules, regulations, policies, procedures, so that governments can effectively leverage generative AI? Knowledge is great if you've got a taxonomy, but I think what's interesting about some of these large language models and some of what we've seen with the generative AI use cases is it can bring structure to the unstructured, but you have to leverage aspects of training in order to do that. So if I look at kind of the models, the feedback loop models, for example, that are used with rich generative AI media creation, some of those can be deployed as it looks at, more specialized knowledge bases like city ordinances and things that may not be traditionally structured. I think the key challenge that we're going to have is around machine readability and making sure that there's a base of OCR on it today that we can leverage. However, neural networks don't require that. So there is the possibility that some of these evolutionary leaps that we have with technology will negate the need for that. But that is a great question. Today you're going to want that information to at least be in a machine readable format. Let's look at, how do you validate ChatGPT to ensure accuracy? So accuracy is a big thing when it comes to ChatGPT, because not everything that you ask it is going to be accurate when it comes back. You could ask it about yourself and to write a bio on you, and it may pull things in that are accurate, but it also may pull things in that are not accurate based on the context of the prompt. And so there is a lot that needs to be kind of considered as a part of that. You can, of course, flag the results today. You can also tell it, hey, this thing is not accurate, and it can learn from that kind of in its own closed system. However, the need to figure out and to identify kind of how we validate knowledge as well as a part of this is going to be important. Fortunately for us, I think a lot of the use cases that we have in the public sector can really be applied to, communicating things differently and finding ways to kind of replace the template that's not personalized, humanizing government, collecting information in a more natural way. So I think that there's a lot that we can extract from that as we go forward. All right, we have a lot of questions still on here. Here we'll take this last one. Local governments don't want to use AI systems. How do we break barriers? I mean, I think, what's interesting about that question is that AI and automation were often scary words when I was in government. because people didn't want to replace people. And anytime you mentioned, AI or automation, it would immediately raise up a flag. And if you had civil service, it would get their attention as well. There's kind of a new era because the most immediate challenge that we're seeing is related to workforce. And we see technology as a way to augment the people that you have and to enhance their ability to do their jobs better, not to replace them, not to replace functions, but to actually give them a secret weapon that they can use to be more effective at what they do. And so I think we're going to see a lot more there. There's still a lot of things that we have to get through around, disclosures, policies, procedures, transparencies, the actual use cases themselves. But I think we'll get through those out of necessity now, because this is no longer a nice to have, but really a mission critical things. That's where we saw chatbots really have their moment during the pandemic, not because the technology matured, but because agencies had no other option. And now we've got an explosion of new types of use cases that we can start to explore with these technologies. Well, we promised you 30 minutes, so I do want to be respectful of our time together here today. We hope this has been informative as we kind of explore the world of generative AI. As Terry mentioned, we're going to do a lot more on this going forward. This is the start of a series, so we'd love to have you along for the ride, and we'll definitely be in touch with future Lunch and Learn webinars that we do on this topic, and we'd love your feedback. So we'll take the questions that we weren't able to get to today, and we'll start working on some FAQs so that way we can respond to that. But really appreciate everyone carving some time out to join us as we dive into the world of generative AI, and look forward to hearing your use cases and stories as well. Thanks for your time today. We hope you have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you at our next Lunch and Learn webinar from the Center for Digital Government. Thank you.